As the Mongols left the Jurchid lands, they trampled farmland and returned the country to open steppe. Herds of animals could now migrate into Jurchid lands, and the Mongolian army could now navigate more easily throughout Jurchid territory. When Genghis arrived home with his army, he brought with him more loot than Mongolia had ever seen. Streams of gold, silver, and silk flowed into Mongolia from China. Not only commodities, but also Chinese craftsmen, doctors, and scholars. Mongolia had become a wealthy nation within less than a lifetime. Herders were now wealthy beyond their wildest dreams. But this new wealth created demand. Mongolia needed more. Genghis now controlled vassal states surrounding Mongolia. The Muslim Uyghurs to the west proved loyal to him in his conquest of his newest territory in northern China. However, further to the west, there were more Uyghurs under the control of a Buddhist aristocracy recently overthrown by Guchleg, Prince of the Naiman. Guchleg had married into the Buddhist royalty and overthrew his father-in-law to become ruler of the Uyghurs. He was a ruthless leader who did not tolerate the religion of his subjects. The Muslim call to prayer was forbidden, and the population was persecuted daily. In one instance, shortly after leaving for an excursion to conquer land, the gates to the city were closed behind him. Guchleg returned with an army, captured the city, and razed it. The Uyghurs had nowhere else to turn, as the Muslim West had no interest in their distant affairs, so they turned to Genghis and pleaded with him that they free them of religious tyranny. Genghis Khan heard their plea and sent one of his generals on a mission to overthrow the ruling class. He had a reason after all. Guchleg was the last of his enemies he had yet to kill. When the Mongols arrived, they easily defeated the armies Guchleg could muster and killed the rest of the aristocracy. The Mongols did not plunder the Uyghurs and declared that religious freedom was restored to the people. Genghis Khan now fully controlled all of the surrounding nations around him, and he no longer had any enemies to fear. Comfortable with the safety of his people, he could now look outward to try to satisfy his people's need for more loot. Genghis sent 3 ambassadors to the easternmost Muslim nation known as the Khwarizm, to the Sultan Muhammad II. The ambassadors requested that their people trade fairly and uninterrupted. They brought with them Genghis Khan's word. "I have the greatest desire to live in peace with you. I shall look on you as my son. For your part, you are not unaware that I have conquered northern China and subjugated all of the tribes of the north. You know that my country is an ant-heap of warriors, a mine of silver, and that I have no need to covet other dominions. We have an equal interest in fostering trade between our subjects." The Sultan reluctantly agreed to Genghis Khan's wishes and sent the ambassadors back to Mongolia. Shortly after, hundreds upon hundreds of merchants from all over Mongolian lands came from Mongolia with caravans full of Chinese silks and other precious materials. When they entered the first Khwarizm city, they were stopped by the governor, who ordered the merchants killed and all of their goods taken. The governor's mistake would not only doom him, but open the rest of the world to Genghis. Genghis Khan was infuriated and sent envoys to order the Sultan to punish his governor. The Sultan killed some of the envoys and mutilated the faces of the rest to return to the Khan and deliver his message. Yet again, the world lacked the fear of Genghis that he deserved, and yet again, they would be proven wrong. The Mongols moved like lightning. They moved through the desert surrounding the Mongolian Empire and were behind the enemy before the Muslims knew the Mongols had moved against them. Genghis annihilated the Mongolian, ruling over the empire in less than a year. The Sultan Muhammad II fled his empire deeper into Muslim lands, and the Mongols gave chase. In each city the Mongols captured, they slaughtered the soldiers. The Mongols had no need for infantry and could not afford to leave enemy armies behind them as they advanced westward. The rest of the able-bodied population was then captured and used by the Mongols in the war. Digging holes, filling trenches, and simple meat shields were all of great use to the outnumbered Mongol force. The Mongols killed the aristocrats in every city they captured. This prevented any potential rebellion, with no army or leaders to lead them, and to the Mongols, eliminated a useless mouth to feed. In one famous case, the mother of the Sultan was captured in her city, watched as her family and advisors were killed, and was then sent back to Mongolia to serve the Mongols as a slave. During this conquest, the Muslim scholars of the time recorded Genghis Khan's most famous quote, "The greatest joy a man can know is to conquer his enemies and drive them before him, to ride their horses and take away their possessions, to see the faces of those who were dear to them bedewed with tears, and to clasp their wives and daughters in his arms." Come back next episode for the death of Genghis Khan and the restructuring of the Mongol Empire. Support the channel on Patreon and subscribe for weekly animated history videos.